This week marks 50 years since the Test debut of Derek Randall. Older listeners may well remember him being a firm favourite of the England side, even though Messrs, Botham, Willis, etc. were grabbing the headlines. Derek Randall was always someone you looked out for in those days. And we are joined by Richard Clarke, who has just written a really excellent article in the cricket paper. And we welcome him to 1909. Richard, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Darren, and nice to meet you, Paul.
So Derek Randall, what a character, and what just a memorable figure he was from a very different time of English cricket.
Yeah, and I think that's what the piece was about. It was about the loss of fun of within English cricket, and I look at the England team of great team at the moment, but it feels all very sanitized. There's the odd character like Mark Wood, but it feels very corporate, sanitized, prawn sandwich brigade, measured press conferences where they're told to say this and told to say that. Derek Randall was different. Derek Randall, his character shone on the pitch. He was just a happy guy, and he played his cricket in a happy way. He was an excellent fielder. I think some people would say only Jonty Rhodes was better. I mean, in terms of that sort of standout ability to pounce on a ball and throw down the stumps from distance, fielding at wherever it may be in mid-wicket or in the covers. It really is. Jonty Rhodes is above Randall, but those two are the two that stand out in people's minds. As a batsman, he had his hits and misses. Obviously, the 174 in the centenary test in Australia was the standout. But in the first innings of that, he got peppered by Dennis Lillee, and the famous doff of the cap picture that accompanied the piece that I wrote. And it showed his character, and it's about fun. And he thoroughly enjoyed his cricket. He played minor counties cricket till he was 51 for Suffolk, because he thoroughly enjoyed the game. And I read some quotes saying, I enjoyed the minor counties stuff more because it was more fun. And in the previous life, I worked at a major football club, right? And I've also written a blog about my favourite interview was with a guy called Arthur Milton, the last player to play for England at football and cricket. And the reason why he's my favourite interview is because he did it because it was fun. He wanted to play with his mates, and that essence of fun comes through with Derek Randall, and I think it's been lost in the modern game, and I miss it.
Do you think there are any vestiges of it? And I get I take your point completely about the England team, and I'll elaborate on that in a bit. But do you think county cricket is still as miserable as the national team, or do you think there's still fun and characters around the county circuit?
I think there's always fun that can be had, but we are in a sport in the last 20 years, 30 years in the UK has moved to become a business. And within sporting clubs, you have people treating it like a business, and the positions are filled by business people. Therefore, they are going to perpetuate that concept of this being a business. It needs to be serious. Money needs to be at the heart of it. Winning leads to money. Therefore, we have to treat this like a business because that's the most important thing. I disagree with that, because I was an Essex fan 40 years ago when we won in 79. And we were the best team till 94. And then there was a whole heap of rubbish from 94 till about 3 years ago. And I was still an Essex fan. So I, as a fan, am not, my fandom is not based on results, right? Whereas the clubs, and this is all sport, especially football, of course, but it's permeated down into cricket. The clubs treat the game as it's a result business. It's not a results business, because if it was a results business, I'd have supported 3 or 4 different counties between 1994 and 2016 when we won the second division. So there's pockets of it, and it's much more possible to have that fun element to it, because remember, as a cricket fan, as a county cricket fan, you're a member, you're not a season ticket holder. So that invested element is a little bit deeper. But I worry that it's all going in the same direction, which is We need to win. We need to be corporate. There needs to be a sheen across this. And the personality that fans love is lost. There's the odd person like Mark Wood. I think Mark Wood, that breaks through. But there's precious few of them. Precious few.
I think from that era, it was quite a common thing. I mean, just sticking with Derek Randall, I mean, for all of the personality that he showed on the pitch and the nattering away to himself and the doffing of the cap and everything, he was actually a very good cricketer, wasn't he?
He's a great cricketer. Yeah, I mean, he's a great batsman. I mean, and I think he was 47 caps, but he was actually a little bit in and out as a player. He didn't get that. I think I mentioned it in the piece that he was never quite trusted by the selectors. I think, and in the piece I talk about the fact that he's a bit of a working class hero. He played for Retford, he played for Nottinghamshire. All his success, his biggest successes, he frames in the Nottinghamshire area. He's now, there's a clip of him coaching kids, a clip on YouTube of him coaching kids at a Nottinghamshire school. And he's the same sort of languid approach, but he's so enthusiastic for the game. And this was coaching 3 or 4 years ago. Just look it up because he's the same fella. But he had a good Test career. 47 caps is no bad thing, but I do think there was in those days there was a little bit of a class thing going on. To be honest, let's be honest. Yeah. And he didn't always fit the bracket of the good public school chap, because I don't think he was.
Compare that to the current day game, and I've talked about this before on the show, so this is why I was really pleased to read your piece. When I see England taking wickets, I see bulging veins, I see blood red, thundering faces, aggressive shouting, fist pumping, almost feral behaviour in the middle, which I find, sort of cause and effect maybe. But the thing that I would question is I don't see it everywhere. Now, I look at when Pakistan take wickets or the West Indies take wickets or even someone like Bangladesh, even New Zealand, to bring it sort of to the relevance of the number one rated team. Do you think that England are under more pressure from all of the influences you talked about than other nations?
More than anybody else? I don't think anyone's under more pressure than the Indian team, to be honest. But the England team, obviously, they are under massive pressure for their places, for their livelihoods. I love the New Zealand team because I read about them, and it was like we tried to sledge, but we gave it up because we're rubbish at it. And Kane Williamson, Nasser Hussain, who's obviously considered quite a hard-edged cricketer, was laughing to himself almost on commentary because Kane Williamson tried to run out, I think it was Kohli, missed the stumps, hit Kohli, and then apologised, right? Because even though it was a perfectly legitimate throw at the stumps, he happened to hit Kohli. It wasn't massively hard, but Kane Williamson wants to apologise, and Nasser Hussain is tutting at that. And I also sense there's an element of him tutting at it because that's not what I would do, and it proves how gentlemanly they are, and they're loved for it. They're absolutely loved for it. I mean, sport has become very serious, and obviously football's taken, back in when Derek Randall was playing, there was a football and a cricket season, and cricket dominated most of the summer. Now that has changed, and football dominates 24/7. It's obviously the Premier League, huge money, huge interest, huge revenue in for the players, for the executives, for the teams, etc., etc. And that's every other sport, in my opinion, looks at that. And as you know, I've worked in major sport all over the world, and they look at what's making the most amount of money, and you try and copy that. I argue, as a sports fan, money's not important to me. And I wrote a book last year, which you were very kindly to have me on to talk about. Fantastic, well plugged. Thank you very much.
There you go.
You can buy it now on Amazon and all other places. Anyway, plug over. But I wrote about the fact that so much of cricket in particular, but all sports, is based on volunteers. It's based on volunteers. The first person who would have coached most England players, I think, would have been a volunteer. Right? Okay, the club might have paid for them to get a a coaching qualification or something like that, but it often be someone's dad. So much of the game is based on free labor, okay, because of love of the sport. And I believe that sport itself doesn't repay that in interest, affection and support, not just financial, but and cricket's better than many. Cricket's better than many, but it doesn't pay it back. And there's a disconnect, because I've got a lot of interest in this article that I've written about Derek Randall, and people talking about money's taken over, it's too serious, etc., etc. Derek Randall played for the love, and that's why we're talking about him 50 years after his professional career started. You know, how many of the England players will be talked about in 50 years' time with such affection? I don't know.
How many will be entertaining after dinner speakers?
Well, yeah. That's the other thing as well. But it's fun. It's sport. Everyone goes into sport because it's fun, and there are the precious few that make a professional career out of it, and they have to change their attitude. But everybody goes into sport initially because they enjoy it for itself, for the competition, and for what you can gain out of it as a person, as a human being.
Is the football European Super League kind of like the horror story progression of this corporate money takeover of sport, using football as an example?
Sorry, what do you mean? What's the question there?
In the sense that the sport gets forgotten about, the fans get forgotten about, and it becomes just a complete money-making exercise. Therefore, we don't care. This will make money, and everyone gets rich.
Yes, and it's also creaming off the top. It's that there are huge pillars that hold up every sport. A lot of those are volunteers. A lot of those are literally the grassroots. And of course, that's the argument against the 100, that it's creaming off the top and not supporting the pillars of the game itself. And the European Super League, though, is you could argue it is the logical conclusion of where we've been going. Right? It's the logical conclusion, because whenever it was 1992, the Premier League starts. Okay, they're jettisoning potentially 72 clubs, and the Premier League's where it's at. Okay, well now 30 years later, now the Premier League saying, well, actually, it's really only about six clubs at the top. So we'll go and we'll jettison you. So it's all about the money makers looking to make more money for themselves and jettisoning those below that they perceive drag them down. I would argue you need them to support the whole of the game. It's a little bit different in football, but in cricket, you know, we have an existential crisis in cricket. This sport that we all love, and you two, I know, are very much involved in the grassroots of the sport. There is an existential crisis. You've seen it since 2005. Participation has gone down. It's not being played in schools. Some good work being done by the ECB with All Stars and the other schemes they've brought in this year. And there is some good work being done. And the question that the 100 answers is the right question to ask. It's just that the answer's wrong.
And it's an interesting point, because if you bring everything back, the volunteer aspect is now actually becoming more and more infrequent. You know, clubs are based on volunteers, absolutely, but people nowadays want to be paid, and that's sad.
Really, right? Okay, all the volunteers want to be paid. Well,
not all.
They're not volunteers by definition if they want to be paid. But.
Certainly not all, no, but it's a generational thing now. I think, you know, people expect. Some people, by no means all people, some people expect something in return.
It's interesting because my argument is that the pandemic may be in some ways a positive for the grassroots of sport, because it has potentially reframed our focus on what sports means to us, and also hopefully knocked a few heads together at local authorities and say, well, look, our community, where does our community come together? Well, there's arts, but there's sport, and sport is one of the most obvious ways. And so combining non-league football, and how does non-league football survive without local authority help? How does a club like your club is Billericay, right? I mean, how does that survive without some local authority assistance in some way? going forward, but also understanding that your role as a club is going to support your futures are going to be more linked. The future of community and the clubs within that community are going to be closer linked, in my opinion, if we can come out of this pandemic and keep this positivity in this community. And we weren't clapping for the NHS 2 years ago, but we all believed in it. Now, have we changed our heads to the extent that we can turn around to our neighbour that we're outside clapping alongside and think, okay, I'm going to help them a little bit more? Does that mean being taxed at a local level a little bit more, as long as I can see it's going to the right places? Perhaps there's a green shoot of positivity there. Perhaps.
I think that's the approach that we're taking at both at Billericay and Brentwood. And I think you're right. I think you make a good point that the pandemic has reinvigorated the sense of community, and in the fact that if we can involve the community, even those that aren't interested in cricket, but just as a focal point of bringing people together and basically mutual back scratching. If we've got 300 members, that's 300 customers potentially for your business, your small business, whatever. That seems to be the way that we're sort of coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and I hope that works. I hope that works, because it's more apparent perhaps in non-league football, because they are run as businesses perhaps. There's always they're very homespun businesses, shall we say, but they are businesses. And non-league football and the sort of higher echelons of club cricket kind of fit together in the sense. And I don't know how non-league football survives without that community aspect to it. I don't know how it's going to, because the pandemic has laid bare some of the lack of economic business thinking that underlines these sports. So, unless you say, right, your football club, your cricket club is now a community asset, and therefore we're going to run it not with profit in mind, but with social good in mind. Is that going to... We've moved a long way from Derek Randall, by the way. We've moved a long way just to interrupt myself, we've moved a long way from Derek Randall. You're not doing this interview very well. Get it back on Derek Randall. I'm talking politics now.
Well, I'm talking amateurs and volunteers. All right, bringing it back to cricket then. The excellent and kind of, there is a logic here, but kind of probably the high point of the sort of the romantic era as we're sitting here as old fuddy-duddies. Spinwash 93, which when you watch it now, and I've sat and watched it with my son, and to him it looks like a club tour, and it is an absolute world away from the team that England has become. It is quite amazing, and I've been telling people for the last couple of weeks that this is a must-watch thing. For those that don't know, it's Dermot Reeve took a handy cam, and if you don't know what that is, look it up, on the tour, and they dug out the footage, and it's a kind of a behind-the-scenes look at England touring in India in 93. Disaster on the pitch, but off the pitch, very, very enlightening, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the modern lens, and this is what I've been talking about, the modern lens would say it's a disaster on the pitch. You're being paid a lot of money. This isn't good enough. Yes, it did look like a tour, a boys' tour, and I've read Derek Pringle's book recently, and that is, so we went to this nightclub in between the third day and the fourth day of the test at Lord's. Me and Beefy did this, blah 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 blah. Thinking, this is a world away. These days, someone with a camera or a phone is going to footage is going to be all over Twitter the next morning. You can't get away from that. But there's nothing wrong. And bear in mind, just to put a caveat across this whole conversation, sports people are invested in, they need to be serious, and they do need to compete at the highest level. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be so overly sold. It doesn't have to be so corporate. Getting back to Spinwash, fascinating documentary about those characters, but that is very much seen as the line between the old and the new. And Pringle's book also is just before that Spinwash era. And I think the way that would be mediated now, obviously with looking back 30 years, it's jolly fun. These days, that would be considered a disgrace. what went on that tour, not only on the pitch but off the pitch in terms of performance, the way they acted, and having to be professional at all times. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a different world, and yeah, it's a difficult point, because you want it to be fun, but you want the team to do well, right? You want the team to maximize their ability. Did we do that by the amount of beer that they drank? I'd argue these days, no.
I'm not sure it was only just that. It was also just what for me was quite an eyebrow-raising thing, was just the setup. The fact that they only had one medic on the tour. The scorer was taken ill and had to return home. So someone's Dermot Reeves' mum, I think it was.
Dermot Reeves' mum, yeah.
Right. Took over scoring duties. And they were travelling around on tiny little planes and on trains to get across the country. Stuff that you just wouldn't see now at all. Yeah,
but that was sport 30, 40 years ago. I mean, that's part of the positive side of big business coming into it, of being thought of as a business with, Sky's TV deal. I would argue that the Sky deal in 2005, it meant less people came to Billericay and Braintree to play cricket, but that's there was more support staff, more infrastructure. So it's not just a black and white issue. That as long as the money is used positively, where you could argue that was money being used positively, that they are traveling, their support staff is better, their infrastructure is better. But a lot of sports clubs, I know sports clubs, I've worked at sports clubs that 5 or 6 years ago were struggling to get in, football clubs that were struggling to get in a masseur, for example, professional 24/7 professional teams that are struggling to get in a masseur, because it's not considered, they don't think that way, right? So the modern sports science it's really developed very, very quickly, and the concept of marginal gains, 1% here, 1% there, with getting a masseur in ice bars, sports science, psychologist, all this stuff, it all adds up. It all needs paying for. It all makes you more professional, and that is undoubtedly a good thing. But I think the other thing is the way the media treats it is important, and the way the fans treat that, because you put the modern media, as I talked about, put the modern media on Spinwash, and it's going to be disgrace, bad stories everywhere. Okay, now that's okay. We kind of accept that as cricket consumers, cricket media consumers. We have to look through and understand, well, is that really? We have to make the decision. What do we want from our team? How do we want them to act? Okay. For example, I want my cricket team to play hard, be professional, but I want them to be sporting. Okay. I want them to respect what I consider to be the right values. Okay. Even to the cost of victory. I'm happy for that to happen. Okay. I'm happy for that. So when Joe Root goes back at a West Indian player a couple of years ago and says there's nothing wrong with being gay, I want that. I want that from my England captain, right? I want the right person in charge. I talked about in the book when Adam Wheater at Kent walked when we were struggling 8 or 9 down, and he walked for a caught behind. That's what I want. I want that. Even if we'd lost the match and therefore lost the championship, I want that, because that's the right thing to do. Sport is not just about solely winning for me. It needs to be done in the right way, and we need to have values within it. Otherwise, it's just it's just who's the fittest, who's the strongest. Sport has much more meaning in it for me.
Prior to you disappearing off, Richard, so first of all, I would urge everyone to look at this article in the Cricket's paper, and
that's on my website as well. It's on my website. You can get it on my website.
And your website is
mrrichardclarke.com. That's where it's free. It's freely available. So that's why I'm correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
And also
I don't want to do your I've interrupted you once. I'll stop interrupting.
No, it's quite all right. That's quite all right. I'm not grumbling, but you are.
Well done.
Richard Clarke, aka the Grumbler. Many, many thanks.